A South Korean village around 25 kilometers from the inter-Korean border was rocked by a loud explosion Thursday morning. A bomb had fallen from the sky, but not from the north. The source was, in fact, a South Korean fighter jet. It happened around 10 a.m. The KF-16 jet in question was participating in a joint live-fire drill with US forces out of a training center in Pocheon, Gyeonggi Province.
The US and South Korea just dropped 8 bombs on homes and churches in a town called Pocheon in South Korea. Now, the US media is moving quickly to say that none of this is the US military's fault, while the South Korean right wing is saying that the entire thing's fake news. They're both wrong. Yes, while these bombs were dropped by fighter jets that were from South Korea, these fighter jets were participating in war drills led by the United States. War drills happening to prepare for the massive war games called Freedom Shield that the US will lead from March 10 to the 19th this year. Now, it sounds crazy, but South Korea actually doesn't have wartime operational control of its military. That control rests in the hands of the United States, meaning that whatever war drills led to these bombings were orchestrated by the US. The bombs used were also Mk-82s, which are bombs manufactured here in the US by General Dynamics. These bombs weigh 500 pounds and have a blast radius of a soccer field. These are the same bombs that the US is selling to Israel in its genocide in Gaza. Now, the equation is simple. US bombs, US war games, that means US responsibility. The US pretends that it's protecting South Koreans through its occupation, but we see that in reality, all it does is place Koreans in harm's way.
Right now, the U.S. government is carrying out increased escalations of aggression against the DPRK and Korea in general. The U.S. just carried out so-called Operation Freedom Shield with the puppet government of South Korea as a significant war threat against the DPRK. The U.S. regularly carries out these major war games operations against the DPRK, which is what it is a threat against the DPRK and preparations for war aggression against the DPRK. And the South Korean people themselves are victims of this aggression as well. The Korean nation as a whole is a victim of this imperialist aggression, as we saw during these drills between the US and South Korean regime. They actually bombed a South Korean village, which should just show you that the US imperialists and their puppet regime in South Korea don't give a damn about the people of Korea, don't give a damn about the people of South Korea. And along with this, there's also escalating political turmoil in South Korea. The far-right regime of South Korea tried to do a major power grab and bring the country back into a openly authoritarian direction a few months ago, and there's still political turmoil going on with that. And there's increased censorship of pro-DPRK voices on the internet. So to discuss this, we have a great guest back on the show. You've probably seen him before, Comrade Dermot Hudson of the Korean Friendship Association of the UK. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me on your show. It's great to be here. It's great to be back after, I think last time was about 2 years ago when I appeared on your show. So I think we will discuss the issues you've raised in great detail.
Yes, thank you. And I've been meaning to have you back on, and it's great to finally have you back on to discuss this stuff. I think people are curious about what's going on in the situation in Korea, especially because now with the United States, there's a new administration. The Joe Biden regime is no longer in power, and the Trump regime is in power. And I think there's a lot of confusion on many issues related to Trump within anti-imperialist circles. One big part of that, I think, was his policy towards Korea. In 2018, I think anti-imperialists, including myself, I praised Trump actually a lot for meeting with Kim Jong-un in 2018 and making an effort to reduce tensions with the DPRK at that point. But the way I understand it, this was basically a ploy by U.S. imperialism to try and get the DPRK to lower its guard and try and open up to U.S. imperialism in the southern puppet regime. But the DPRK didn't fall for this. The DPRK wants to have peaceful relations with countries around the world, so they took the opportunity to meet with Donald Trump. But when it became clear that the U.S. was not serious in pursuing any kind of improvement of relations, I think the DPRK basically made it clear that they see the situation for what it is, and they blew up the Joint Liaison building in 2020, which was sort of a signal that this attempt by the imperialists to infiltrate into the DPRK had failed, or that the DPRK had recognized it for what it is, and that was the end of any sort of furtherance of that policy of trying to improve relations. But now Trump is back in office, and we see his imperialist, expansionist rhetoric with various regions of the world talking about the U.S. is going to take over Gaza, take over the Panama Canal, invade Mexico, invade Canada. You know, the list goes on and on. So now we see this the Trump regime in action with these drills with the regime of South Korea, and these drills are very much opposed by the South Korean people. They're opposed by the DPRK. Could you talk about what just happened with this these so-called Freedom Shield military drills with South Korea and the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can talk about that. In fact, Freedom Shield is 2025. It's actually been held for a slightly longer period than last year. It's bigger in scale than last year. And you know, Trump did not cancel the exercise, and as I'm sure you're aware, Trump is someone who can actually move very fast. You know, he can sign presidential orders like at a drop of a hat. He's not like Sleepy Joe. You know, he can react to situations very quickly, but you know, he chose not to do so, and I think this is proof, if any proof was really needed, that he is continuing the hostile policy towards the DPRK of US imperialism and all US administrations. Now, these exercises are very big in scale, and I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is it's not just the US or South Korea, but it's actually nations from the so-called United Nations Command in South Korea. Now, that was the United Nations Command, or UNC, was never really, well, not at all, a UN command. It's really a US controlled entity. And for many years, I think it was described as a ghost-like body. Had no real meaning, and you know, a lot of people thought its function was ceremonial, or even people didn't realize it existed, and it is basically composed of those satellite countries of the US, like Britain, like France, Philippines, Thailand, Colombia, just to name a few countries, of Australia and New Zealand. Mustn't forget those two, that fought against the DPRK with the US imperialists in the last Korean War, the Fatherland Liberation War. as part of the so-called UN forces, which were basically something that was cooked up by the US, because they were able to railroad a resolution through the UN Security Council in the absence of the Soviet delegate. So this structure was created, the UN Command, and for many years it wasn't very obviously active. But in the last 15 years, the US have been moving to revive it. And this is quite sinister, because what they're really trying to do is to create a multinational force to fight against the DPRK, to intervene against the DPRK, like they did in Iraq, and also like is being vaguely talked about, creating another coalition of the willing to fight against Russia in Ukraine and Donbass. But you've also got this entity that exists on the Korean Peninsula. So with Freedom Shield, you've actually got about more than a dozen armed forces actually involved in it. So it's quite big in scale and quite deep in scope. And of course, as I've always argued, and we've always said in KFA-UK, to people who say, "Oh, but it's an exercise. Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, they always do this." Well, the point of holding military exercises, which cost money, and of course, with the Trump regime and his acolyte, Mr. Musk, finance has become a very important subject. So they're not holding these exercises for fun. They been held with for a real reason, and the whole point of such exercises is to rehearse for war, to practice the invasion of the DPRK and regime change. And last year, these exercises included so-called decapitation strikes, aiming at taking out the supreme leadership of the DPRK, and also, strikes on its nuclear facilities. So, these are a very real aggression. And, you can also compare it to fire drills in offices and other workplaces, which, those of us who worked in an office and, gone through a fire drill, find them very annoying. But these are not done for fun. These are to prepare for the eventuality that one day there might be a real fire. And I was in a building once when fortunately it was a small fire. A real fire did break out. And, it's the same with these exercises. They've been held to prepare for an actual war. The military planners, actually envisage that there will be a war. There's no other reason for holding these exercises. And in fact, I think there's been instances in history where military exercises have actually gone over to actual war. It has happened. So basically, the US, with its South Korean puppets and also lackeys and puppets from other countries, is basically practicing to invade people's Korea, to overthrow the socialist system, and to make the northern half of Korea a colony, just like the South. That's why these exercises are being held. And it's good that your channel is drawing attention to this, because I think there's not enough attention given to these exercises, and we need to do a lot more to expose the warmongering of the US and the ROK puppets, and to express total solidarity with people's career with no ifs or buts.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as you said, these drills, it's not just, some people could downplay them and try and say, oh, they're just drills. Who cares? But think about it from the DPRK's perspective. Not only is this the US imperialists that bombed the country, killed millions of Koreans previously, has consistently targeted the DPRK with sanctions and just continuously been hostile towards the DPRK and attacked and destroyed countless countries around the world. The US is now doing these massive military exercises right at your border. From the DPRK's perspective, obviously, this is a major threat to the country, and they have to prepare for the potential for the US to actually attack the DPRK. Whenever these exercises happen, the DPRK has to prepare as if the US is about to basically attack. Because what they do is the US and their puppets, they carry out these exercises and basically go as if they're attacking, as if they're carrying out war operations, and then they go and then they just stop right at the border. From the DPRK's perspective, how do they know that the US is going to stop at the border? They actually have to be prepared for the possibility that the US is actually going to attack. And when you take into account all the history of US aggression against Korea and countless countries around the world, this is a very, very serious thing. These operations require massive amounts of resources to carry out. So they're not just being done, as you said, they're not just being done for fun. They're being done for a reason, and it's to further US imperialism on the Korean Peninsula. And the South Korean government is indeed a puppet of the US. It was set up and established by the US in the first place, but even to this day, the US occupies South Korea. No, there are no foreign troops in the DPRK, North Korea. There are no foreign troops there. While South Korea is occupied by the United States, the South Korean military, if I'm not mistaken, actually falls under US command. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, the US holds the prerogative of command over the South Korean military.
So South Korea doesn't even really control its own military. So that should really tell you all you need to know. And the people in the southern half of Korea are not just passively, watching this happen to their country. They actually have come out and massively opposed this. And for decades, since the U.S. has been occupying South Korea, there have been massive uprisings and protests against the U.S. It's not talked about in the West much. It's very unknown, particularly in the U.S. It's very unknown. But right now, there's actually huge protests going on in South Korea against the government and against the U.S. Could you talk a little about that?
Well, South Korea is in a state of very deep internal crisis, incredibly deep internal crisis, which of course makes the situation even more dangerous, because they could try to launch a war to distract people from the very deep contradictions in South Korea. And these were ripped open last December when the puppet ruler Yoon took it upon himself to declare martial law. And this, to a lot of people, came out of the blue. It was a shock. I think the liberals who've supported South Korea and who've supported US imperialism in South Korea, I think it was a very nasty jolt for them. However, only within a few hours of declaring martial law, Yun actually reversed it. And there is a reason for that. Again, liberals, said, oh, this proves that, South Korea is not so bad. He reversed martial law because of pressure of the people. This isn't true. The real reason, and you had to follow the media reports very closely on the day. The real reason was he hadn't asked his real masters, the US, whether he could declare martial law. And I read at the time that the US were not pleased that they hadn't been consulted, and I think he was told to reverse it. And of course, this just worsened things. I mean, I think the reason why Yun declared martial law was because there was going to be an official investigation into corruption under him. He's a very corrupt ruler. There was also a question of his wife exercising a lot of power behind the scenes. All these things were going to be investigated, and he tried to declare martial law to stop these investigations, and he came up with ludicrous reasons for declaring martial law, saying that South Korea was in fact full of communists and agents of the DPRK, that they were in opposition parties, they were in the government even, and it was totally bizarre, but far from unknown in South Korea, because South Korea, ever since 1945, it's not just been ruled by puppets, but it's been ruled by very extreme fascist dictators like Syngman Rhee, like Park Chung-hee, Chun Doo-han, and all of these sort of came out with similar sort of bizarre things, allegations, communists everywhere. DPRK is poised to invade, or if we don't crack down, the North will invade. All these kind of things, and Yun was just repeating these things. And I think the thing was, certainly, Trump might take a different line, but I think Biden thought that there would be no advantage of having an old style fascist regime in South Korea that would actually end up creating more problems for the US than it would solve. And in fact, it would have ruined the very carefully crafted and carefully engineered image of South Korea that's been built up by the US and corporate propaganda machine over I think 3 or 4 decades, possibly a bit longer. But the image of prosperity or a liberal democracy, and to have a lunatic fascist regime that was arresting everyone. Apparently on the night of martial law, had drawn up a list of people to arrest, including former presidents of South Korea, including people from his own party. He would have been, quite a liability. And in fact, in the past, with the US in South Korea, and I think maybe other countries, when the puppets they put in power became a liability, when they could get no more out of them, they were dispensed with. Park Chung-hee was actually shot through the head by his own chief of security on the orders of the US. So Biden was, I think, more than happy to throw Yun under a bus. And the thing was, after reversing martial law, Yun found himself impeached and even arrested. Apparently, there was a standoff because Yun's own guards initially prevented him from being arrested, and were, apparently some military units were still loyal to Yun. He was arrested, impeached. He was released early. And I think this actually shows that what's happening in South Korea. There's a very bitter struggle going on, not between progressive and fascist forces, or between democratic and fascist forces, but actually between different sections of the ruling class. We've got to be fully clear about this, and not have illusions in sort of any South Korean liberal forces, because in fact, we'll come on to this in a minute, these have often been just as bad as the open fascist forces, but there's clearly a very bitter struggle going on. When I looked the last time, no verdict had been made yet on the impeachment. That is still to come, as far as I know, and it is a very tense situation because Yun has a lot of supporters, very, very far right, very, and their heads full of all sorts of nonsense. Who are poised to take to the streets if Yun is impeached. And I think it's anyone's guess whether he will get impeached or not. Different ruling class factions in South Korea, there's a very delicate balance of power between them. So we will wait to see what happens. And I think with South Korea, I mean, you have had sort of periods of fascist rule, and then you've had, in inverted commas, relatively liberal regimes. But in fact, even the so-called liberal regimes in South Korea kept the national security law in force, and this is a very repressive law that makes it illegal to support the DPRK or to advocate communism. And this was kept in force, and of course, very significantly, they never demanded that the US troops leave South Korea, which they could have done so, but they did not. And at the end of 2023, the DPRK made an analysis of its reunification policy, and the conclusion was that certainly in terms of policy towards the DPRK, in fact, both liberal and conservative regimes in South Korea were the same, and whatever differences there existed in approach between them, both tendencies or factions had the aim of overthrowing the DPRK's socialist system. And so the DPRK adopted a new policy, and it took the measure of cutting border roads, inter-Korean roads and railways basically totally blocks the south off. So that's where they're at. With regard to the mass protests, I think they reflect the anger of the South Korean people at the corruption of Yoon. And South Korean people don't want another sort of military fascist regime in power in South Korea. I think those big protests reflect that, but at the same time, you've also got a lot of rowdy support for Yoon. You got the sort of far right in South Korea.
Yeah, I'd seen, as far as the far right of South Korea, they really, from what I've seen, I don't know about all of them, but they really try to imitate like the MAGA Trump supporters of the U.S. I've seen some of them like, using MAGA hats and all this Trump stuff to try and it really shows the opportunism of them, because before they were fully aligned with with the Biden regime of the
Yeah,
U.S. and now
very
that,
much so.
yeah, and now that Trump is in, I think they're trying to very opportunistically uh, sort of play on the MAGA far right. There's communists everywhere, sort of thing. And that's an interesting connection between Yoon and the sort of Trump faction, because like you mentioned before, like Biden's faction probably didn't see a gain by having this sort of far right authoritarian situation in South Korea. And it's a question mark as to what Trump's faction how he'll view that sort of thing. Because if you look at Trump's sort of politics and Yoon's sort of politics, there's very much it's very similar. It's this sort of moving in a very authoritarian direction, getting rid of the veneer of bourgeois democracy under the guise of supposed communists everywhere, radical left in the U.S. There's various terms they use for like woke, DEI, all kinds of buzzwords that they use, but basically they mean like the left, this supposed boogeyman of the left to justify their authoritarian measures. But it's sort of interesting, and I'd be curious to see what you think of this, because it's an interesting situation. Because okay, Trump in his first term, he did meet with Kim Jong-un, and there were steps taken to improve relations for a brief period, and that was interesting because at that point, the ruler of South Korea was a more liberal leader, Moon Jae-in, while Trump was a more right-wing leader. So ideologically they weren't as aligned. Moon Jae-in would be sort of more analogous to, I guess, the Democrats in the U.S., or a more liberal Democrat. Although it's hard to even point to an example. From my understanding, Moon Jae-in, he sort of came in under the guise of being sort of like a reformer to some extent. That I think ended up becoming exposed as fraudulent as time went on. But my understanding of it was basically that, so Trump did this initially to improve relations, but in the end, the U.S. basically, after some years had passed, the Trump administration had basically pressured South Korea to take hostile measures against the DPRK, particularly, if I remember correctly, sending like propaganda balloons across the border, which was in complete violation of the various negotiations they were having at the time, as a deliberate provocation to blow up any potential for further improving of relations between North and South Korea. And that sort of ended up with the DPRK blowing up the Joint Liaison building as sort of a sign that these negotiations are finished. The South and the U.S. are not serious about this. And an interesting thing about that, a lot of people often try to get Trump off the hook and say, oh, he wanted to make peace and do all of these things. It was just the neocons, people like John Bolton, who was a horrible war criminal, certainly. It's these people's fault, not Trump's fault. But the funny thing is that when this happened, this was in 2020. This was after Bolton wasn't in office anymore. And there are many examples around the world where actually these neocons, as criminal and horrible as they are, they actually were sort of restraining Trump on more aggressive actions he wanted to take. Like another thing Trump wanted to do was assassinate Bashar al-Assad. And it was actually the more, quote unquote, deep state people who actually restrained him on that, kind of ironically. But I'm curious, going back to that, when Trump did meet with Kim Jong-un, what's your analysis of that and how that and what ended up coming about with that?
Right. Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's one that ultimately only future historians will be able to answer. I think there's a number of interpretations. One of them that it was just simply a photo op for Trump. It was showmanship. He was trying to make himself look very important and big. I'm the first US president to actually meet a DPRK leader, apparently reversing US policy. However, I think there's other explanations, and I think it was very much a case that he was trying to trick the DPRK to lure them into unilateral disarmament. And in fact, I believe that was actually at the second summit, that demand was put forward for the DPRK to dismantle all its nukes and intercontinental ballistic missiles. And not just that, but basically to open up and reform and introduce the capitalist system into the DPRK. And I think Trump thought he could sell capitalism to the DPRK. That is how I see it. Another factor is that he could have been also trying to use this to frighten the South Korean puppets into paying more for the US forces in South Korea, because what a lot of people don't realize is South Korea is not only occupied by US troops, but they they pay for the privilege, or so-called, of having US troops on their soil. They pay, I think, about $1 billion a year. And one of the things when Trump became president for the first time, he thought South Korea did not pay enough, that they should be paying more for it. And it could have been seen as a way of panicking the puppets into paying more, because I think what would have gone through their heads, and in fact a lot of people's heads, was, will the US troops be pulled out of South Korea? Will South Korea itself be thrown under a bus by the US because of the negotiations with the DPRK? So I think that's one aspect to it. And then, of course, you have the theory that the deep state sabotaged the Trump's engagement with the DPRK. It was sabotaged, and peace with the DPRK was blocked. But I think it was more likely that Trump himself did not have an honest purpose in engaging with the DPRK. And I think you can actually see today with his stance on a lot of different questions, the negotiations with Russia. He is quite capable himself of putting forward very stringent and drastic demands on a negotiating partner. I think Bolton was just there to as to reinforce it. So I don't see Trump's engagement with the DPRK is particularly sincere. I mean, I think the main change he did make was, the bigger exercises in South Korea, they were cancelled. But as he said at the time, they are expensive. But in fact, smaller scale exercises continued. It wasn't the case that all exercises were halted, and of course, US troops remained in South Korea. You got to remember that. And with regard to the South Korean puppets' provocations against the DPRK, yes, they were sending in the balloons. And at the time, Comrade Kim Yo-jong, a Vice Department director of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party Korea, issued a very strong statement, and the Inter-Korean Liaison Office was blown up, which I think was a very powerful demonstration to the South Korean puppets. But worse still, in 2022, the South Korean puppets actually sent COVID-19 into the DPRK by way of balloons, which meant that DPRK had to, for 3 months, go over to an emergency situation. So, these provocations of the South Korean puppet regime are very, very severe and serious. And as for the personality of Moon Jae-in, who everybody seems to have forgotten about by now, though Yoon had actually put him on his arrest list. Moon Jae-in was, of course, actually quite anti-communist and not typically liberal. He was actually a former South Korean Special Forces soldier, so perhaps not as liberal as he may seem. And I mean, the fact he seemed to get on with Trump just shows that the South Korea is a puppet, and they have to obey whoever is in power at the US at the time. So that is the true nature of South Korea.
Yeah, and as far as Trump now being in office, regarding relations with Korea, well, he no longer has people like Bolton and other people that he claims he doesn't like. His government is full of loyalists, and we're seeing that he's going forward with these aggressive military operations, war games against the DPRK. So I think, we'll see in the next 4 years of his presidency, but I think it's pretty obvious what his intentions are with regard to all of these things. As you laid out, the situation in South Korea, there's a tremendous amount of turmoil. There were just massive demonstrations in Seoul, South Korea. I believe it was 2 million people protesting. There's huge opposition to Yoon, what he represents, and moving the country back into a more openly authoritarian direction. But there's also major opposition to the U.S. occupation, the horrible system in South Korea of extreme capitalism, which is just horrific, just a horrific system. There actually been a few pieces of, like film that have come out of South Korea in recent years that have tried to shed light on the massive inequalities and just horrible capitalism that exists in South Korea, such as I think there was the Squid Games, which I think was considered like a major critique of capitalism in South Korea. And then what was that other one that came out? I forget the name of it. It came out in 2020. It was a big deal, a South Korean film. Do you remember
Was it
talking
the
about?
Parasite?
Parasite, yes. Yeah. So certainly, I mean, people in the West are not aware of the horrible capitalism that exists in South Korea and all the contradictions in South Korea, but the South Koreans themselves are living it. Not only the U.S. occupation, but just the horrible exploitative system that exists there. So, the South Korean people will continue to oppose all this, and we'll see where this goes. In the meantime, though, there has been increased censorship of anti-imperialist voices around the issue of Korea. People, followers of this channel, would probably be aware that the KFA-UK has actually been censored off of YouTube, and this comes at a very interesting time as these war games are going on, and there's also an increase of anti-DPRK propaganda in the UK, from what I understand. It's very coincidental, quote unquote coincidental. You guys in the UK are censored off of YouTube, while simultaneously there's an increase of propaganda from the UK against the DPRK. Could you talk about that?
Yes. Basically, I mean, this was the second time that YouTube actually took down a KFA-UK YouTube channel. I obviously run the Songam 007 YouTube channel, which is like my own channel, and also for sort of ideological purposes. But we had a standalone KFA-UK channel, which was to be more focused on KFA and showing videos from the DPRK, actual content from the DPRK. Now, the first channel, KFA-UK, that got taken down, I think, at the end of 2023 or early 2024. Undeterred, we established another channel, and Korean Friendship Association of the UK, and it wasn't active enough for a long time, and then we started putting on video clips from the Voice of Korea website. That is the DPRK's radio station, which also has a website, and there's video clips on it. We were using clips from that and from DPRK sources, and then suddenly, 4th of March, no warning, no consultation, no negotiation. This thing flashed up on my phone. Oh, your channel has been disabled because you're breaking the US sanctions policy. Now, it wasn't clearly explained what sanctions we had broken. I mean, we only can assume we'd broken the US sanctions against the DPRK. And apparently simply by showing content from DPRK media, we weren't actually importing DPRK goods or trying to promote them on the channel. It was simply because we'd used videos from the DPRK. This was enough to get the channel deleted, and they never clearly explained which sanctions we had broken. And as far as I'm concerned, US sanctions have no legal force in the UK anyway. US sanctions stop at the US border. They don't apply to third countries. And not only had the YouTube channel been deleted, but the whole Google account associated with the channel had been. So we lost an email address that we'd use for emailing members. We're still, I'd been writing a book that was on the Google Docs attached to the account. So 2 months of work was wiped out by Google. And there was no appeal system. They said, oh, you can appeal against that, but I couldn't find anywhere where there was like an online form or a button that where you could appeal. Tried to contact Google about 5 times, no reply. Totally, brick walling us. And because we had similar experiences with Facebook a few years ago when they very suddenly, again without warning or consultation, actually deleted the old KFA-UK Facebook page, which had built up a big following of about, I think, 12,000 followers. Probably making it the biggest English language pro DPRK Facebook page. It was just wiped out overnight. Again, we lost videos and pictures that we had on it. And I mean, there is, there are patterns to this, because, as you say, the propaganda in a number of countries against the DPRK is hotting up again, particularly in the UK and some European countries. And our voice is being silenced, simply for the alleged reason that we were using content from the DPRK, which some other people have been using but have not had their channels deleted. But recently, there's been incidents where some British and tourists and from other European countries visited the DPRK now and came back with very hostile reports slandering the DPRK quite a lot. And of course, you got to remember that going to the DPRK is very expensive. I mean, we've got lots of KFA-UK members who'd love to go to the DPRK. They can't afford to do so. So I mean, it's very expensive to go to the DPRK. So unfortunately, people going as tourists, are from certain classes and strata in the West, and basically people who are not going to be very well disposed towards a socialist country and will see faults everywhere, and will go with preconceived notions and will, spout out things to the media, or maybe might even be paid by the media to say bad things about the DPRK. And we've also had some trendy YouTube channels of so-called influencers who've been using these accounts of tourists against the DPRK. And the thing was, I was able to visit the DPRK last year as a delegate to an international seminar on the Juche Idea, which attracted people from quite a lot of countries, from Russia, from Poland, from a lot of Asian countries. 2 Latin American countries represented, Brazil and Mexico. And I was actually I was told I was the first British person in the DPRK since 2019. But the British media didn't want to interview me. On my return, I made it clear I was happy to be interviewed. in the end, the people who stepped forward was a Japanese journalist who produced an account in Japanese, and a woman journalist from Belarus, the Minsk Pravda. I was interviewed by that, but no British outlet.
And you're not unknown
to
to the British. You're not unknown to the British media. You've been interviewed by BBC in the past, right?
That's right. And I mean, last week I did a very lengthy 3-hour interview with a journalist, a British journalist. But I don't know if the interview will be published or how it will turn out. But that was the thing. Yeah, my account was, they know me, and they could have interviewed me, but they decided not to. But instead, they've interviewed a few sort of wealthy bourgeois tourist nobodies, of course, who basically said what they wanted them, the media wanted them to say. That's what's happened. So, getting back to the main point, the main thrust, yeah, I mean, they are trying to censor pro-DPRK voices in order to create a false narrative, and sort of create an impression, there's no support for the DPRK. And, they don't want people seeing actual videos from the DPRK. I mean, the funny thing was actually a lot of the videos on the channel weren't sort of militantly ideological. They were just showing, the reality of the DPRK, life in the DPRK. It was like, a few years ago, there were several different YouTube channels run by DPRK citizens. One featured, a girl university student, which she would just give very factual reports about life in Pyongyang, what was happening. And then a very young girl at a primary school, Song A, she also had videos about her life. Again, nothing very ideological, just showing family life. And YouTube deleted those channels. So there's very, very heavy censorship going on. And Google is a corporation with immense power. It is, a monopoly capitalist tech giant, but its power is truly awesome. Power it's got over people's lives, to basically influence what they think, and in fact control what they think.
Yeah, and again, I'm very sorry to hear about what happened with the, deleting, censoring of the KFA-UK account. I actually didn't realize that they completely deleted the Google account altogether, and that, you lost a lot of work that you'd put in for this book that you're
That's
writing.
right.
I didn't realize that. That's really, really horrible. And there's no transparency, no accountability whatsoever with these corporations. And we see this as there's a broad attack on freedom of speech going on across the Western capitalist countries. There's, along with what just happened to you, more well-known, there's been a huge crackdown on pro-Palestine voices in the United States and the UK in particular, both countries. Recently, there was a huge escalation. Trump is trying to deport people who are here in the United States legally, green card holders, who aren't even accused of committing any crime. They don't even allege that this guy, who they're targeting, Mahmoud Khalil, they don't even allege that he's committed any crime. They just basically are saying, because he's pro-Palestine, they try to allege that he supposedly supported Hamas or something. Of course, they provide no evidence whatsoever for that. They've been repeatedly asked to provide evidence, never provided any evidence. And according to U.S. laws, freedom of speech allows you to say, you could support whatever group you want, so long as you're just saying it, you're not providing material support. So even if he had, which he hadn't, to be clear, and there's no evidence that he had, even if he had, there's no basis to try and do what they're doing to him. So there's an increased attack on freedom of speech in the capitalist countries, and it really shows how all of the rhetoric of democracy, bourgeois democracy, really is just a veneer to disguise the true nature of the system. And the ruling class, the capitalists, they will, take away these freedoms when they feel necessary for the preservation of their power. And it's the role of us, the working class, progressive forces, to fight back against that. And the only reason why we have any level of freedoms in capitalist countries is because the working class has fought strongly for these things. And if we don't fight back against it, we're going to have no rights whatsoever. And we all have to do everything we can to get the truth out and oppose all of these criminal actions by our ruling classes. So I really appreciate everyone joining this conversation today. Please make sure to share this out, subscribe to the channel, and support the KFA-UK as they're facing this horrible censorship. And Comrade Dermot Hudson, can you tell people where people can find you online now that the KFA-UK page is down, where they could go to follow your work?
Right. Well, firstly, thank you very much for your solidarity in drawing attention to the issue of the censorship of KFA-UK. I still have my own YouTube channel, Songam007, which you can find easily. We may try to start another KFA-UK YouTube channel. We've got a channel on Rumble TV, which we need to activate more. You can find us easily on Facebook, and I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. I'm Songam007 on Instagram. On Twitter, I'm Juche 0071 on Twitter, and we have a KFA-UK Twitter account, and we've also got a KFA-UK Telegram channel and a Juche Songam Telegram channel, so you can easily find us there. So we're very active on social media. We've even got a vk.com account for KFA-UK as well. So we're on most social media.
Very good. And I'll make sure to have your YouTube channel in the description of this video. Again, that's Songun007. Thank you very much for coming on the channel again. It's great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon as things develop in Korea and in the US and the UK.
Thank you very much for having me on the channel, and you're very welcome.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining.